There are three passages that almost everyone cites when they want to prove that Satan fell from heaven. Isaiah 14:12, the shining one cast down to earth. Luke 10:18, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Revelation 12, the great dragon thrown down, that ancient serpent called the devil. Three passages, three images. One story, assembled so thoroughly that most people cannot imagine the tradition without it. But these three passages do not describe the same event. They do not describe the same being. They were not written in the same language, in the same century, or for anything resembling the same purpose. Isaiah 14 is a political taunt directed at the king of Babylon, written in Hebrew, 8 centuries before the Common Era. Luke 10:18 is a single sentence spoken in the context of a mission report, almost certainly metaphorical. Revelation 12 is apocalyptic code, dense, layered, debated by scholars for 2 millennia. None of them are describing the same being. The unified fall narrative that holds Western theology together does not exist in the source texts. It was assembled, later, deliberately, from materials that meant something else entirely. In the next hour, 5 distinct beings will be identified, each one assigned a different role in the Satan tradition by different communities at different historical moments. Each carries different crimes. Each received a different punishment. Each had a different fate recorded in texts that predate the Western devil by centuries. You will know each of them by name, by crime, by textual source, and by the specific historical moment at which their distinct identity was dissolved into something simpler. If the singular devil you were taught about does not exist in the ancient texts, if it is a medieval construction assembled from 5 independent traditions, then the entire framework built on that foundation requires examination. Sin, temptation, the nature of evil, the cosmic adversary, the possibility of redemption from a single source of corruption. These are not small questions. They are the architecture of a worldview, and the foundation is not what the tradition claimed it was. One more thing before we begin. One of these 5 beings receives a blood sacrifice in the Torah itself. The text names him directly. The ritual has been performed annually for centuries. Mainstream theology has never satisfactorily explained what it means that the Torah is sending a sacrifice to a being the Book of Enoch identifies as the primary source of human corruption. Hold that. We will reach it. The word Satan in the Hebrew Bible is not a name. It is a job description. By the end of this chapter, you will understand why this single linguistic fact dismantles the entire architecture of the Western devil, and why the tradition had strong institutional reasons to bury it. In Hebrew, the word Satan means adversary or accuser. It describes a function, one who opposes, one who prosecutes, one who tests the case against. It appears across the Hebrew Bible in both human and divine contexts. In 1 Samuel 29:4, the Philistine commanders call David a potential Satan, an adversary in battle. In Numbers 22:22, the angel of the Lord stands in the road before Balaam as a Satan, a blocking force, a challenger. The word describes a role, not a being. The 3 passages most critical to understanding the divine court role: Job 1 and 2, Zechariah 3:1 and 2, and the Balaam narrative in Numbers 22, all present the Satan as an entity operating within the divine court with full permission. In Job, Ha-Satan, note the definite article, the Satan, not a proper name, presents himself before God alongside the other divine beings. God initiates the conversation. God permits the testing. The entity identified as the adversary is functioning as a prosecutorial agent of the divine court, not as its enemy. He is not fallen. He is not rebellious. He is, in every textual sense, on the payroll. Zechariah 3:1 and 2 shows the same dynamic. The Satan standing at the right hand of the high priest Joshua to accuse him, with God himself rebuking the adversary and vindicating Joshua. The presence of the adversarial figure in the divine court is not aberrant. It is structural. The court requires a prosecutor. The prosecutor requires a defendant. The system, as the texts present it, is functioning as designed. The definite article ha is the tell that most readers miss. Throughout the oldest layers of the Hebrew tradition, the figure is never called Satan. He is called Ha-Satan, the adversary, a title, an office. As scholar Philip Alexander has noted, the conception of the Satan figure in early Jewish literature is consistently that of a functionary, a member of the divine administration with a specific brief, not a rebel operating against the administration's will. The evidence that this office and God's own agency were nearly interchangeable comes from a comparison that should be better known. 1 Chronicles 21:1 states that Satan incited David to count Israel. 2 Samuel 24:1 records the same event and attributes it to God. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David. Same event, same action. Two texts, one of which assigns it to the adversarial function, one of which assigns it directly to God. The office is so integrated into the divine operation that the distinction between God moved David and the adversary moved David was, to at least one biblical author, a distinction without a meaningful difference. This is the established ground from the previous episode. What this chapter adds is the following. The prosecutorial Satan is not merely a title that one being holds permanently. It is, by the internal logic of the divine court, a role. Roles can be filled by different office holders. The court of the divine assembly, as the texts describe it, contains multiple beings performing multiple functions. There is nothing in the Hebrew court tradition that requires the adversarial function to be held by a single individual. It is an institution. And the tradition contains other beings, named beings, with distinct identities and distinct crimes, none of which map onto the prosecutorial function at all. By the end of this chapter, the Ha-Satan of Job is clearly separated from what will follow. The prosecutorial Satan operates through legal process within the court with divine sanction. What comes next operates outside all of that entirely. Remember what I said about the Torah sending a sacrifice to one of these beings, not the one from Job, not the one from Zechariah. We are building toward that. The prosecutorial Satan is a defined office in the divine court, a role that could, in principle, be filled by more than one being. But the tradition contains a completely different kind of transgression, one that has nothing to do with prosecution, nothing to do with legal process, and everything to do with desire. It happened on a mountain. It was collective. And the beings who initiated it did something the Satan of Job never did. They swore an oath. Samyaza, Shemihaza, in some manuscript traditions, is the leader of 200 divine beings who descended to Mount Hermon, not out of pride, not out of ideological ambition, but out of desire for human women. By the end of this chapter, you will understand why. That makes his transgression categorically different from every other figure in this video, and why that difference has profound consequences for how the tradition thinks about the origin of corruption. 1 Enoch, chapters 6 through 7, records the account. The Watchers, the Irin, as they are designated in Aramaic, look down from their station and see the daughters of men, and they desire them. Samyaza addresses his companions directly. I fear you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty for a great sin. The response is collective. They swear an oath together, binding themselves mutually to the transgression. 200 divine beings, bound by oath, descend to Ardis on the summit of Mount Hermon. The mountain's name encodes something significant here. Hermon shares a root with Harim, a word meaning devoted to destruction, placed under a ban, consecrated to annihilation. The mountain may carry the memory of the oath in its own etymology. The transgression was written into the landscape. What Samyaza wanted was not souls. It was not worship. He had no interest in humanity's spiritual condition, their loyalty, their corruption. He wanted bodies, physical experience, procreation. He went, in the most literal sense, absent without leave, not to pursue an ideological rebellion, but because embodied existence appealed to him in a way that his original station did not satisfy. As our earlier episode on Samyaza examined in depth, this makes his crime categorically carnal rather than theological. He did not tempt anyone. He did not prosecute anyone. He did not offer forbidden knowledge. He simply descended, and he brought 199 others with him. The Nephilim, the giant offspring of the union between Watchers and human women, are the consequence. 1 Enoch 7:3-5 records their violence. They consumed the food supply, then turned on humanity, then on animals, then on each other. The earth cried out under the weight of their predation. The spirits of the Nephilim, when they eventually die, do not ascend. 1 Enoch 15:8-12 records that they become the disembodied spirits, the demons, that continue to afflict humanity after the flood. Samyaza's transgression does not end with the flood. It propagates forward through the spirits of his offspring. His punishment is specific, bound beneath the hills of the earth until the day of judgment, not cast from heaven, not granted any prosecutorial function, not given any continued role in cosmic administration, buried in chains, waiting. The theological distinction that matters here is this: Samyaza's transgression is embodied and collective. It enters the world through flesh and through blood, through the physical consequence of a desire acted upon. There is no ideology in it, no articulated grievance against the divine order, no program for humanity's corruption. The prosecutorial Satan operates within a legal framework, serving a defined institutional function. Samyaza operates entirely outside that framework, not in opposition to it, but in complete disregard of it. These are not two expressions of the same rebellion. They are two completely different categories of transgression, recorded in two completely different textual traditions, by two communities with two different theories about where evil originates. The Mesopotamian context is worth noting briefly here. The Apkallu tradition, the seven sages of Babylonian mythology, semi-divine beings who taught humanity civilization before the flood, shadows the Watcher narrative closely enough that scholars, including Annette Yoshiko-Reed, have traced direct lines of influence. The memory of primordial divine teachers who crossed the boundary between the heavenly and earthly realms runs through multiple ancient Near Eastern traditions. The Enochic Watchers are drawing on a reservoir of mythological thought that predates Second Temple Judaism by centuries. That trajectory, the Mesopotamian origins of the fallen angel tradition, is a subject for a future episode. It is sufficient here to note that Samyaza is not an isolated Jewish invention. He is the Hebrew inheritor of something much older. Samyaza wanted bodies. His corruption entered the world through flesh and through offspring, through the physical consequence of desire acted upon. But another Watcher had a completely different target. His crime was not the body, it was the mind. And the text that records his punishment holds, buried inside the legal architecture of the Torah, the single strangest ritual in the entire Hebrew Bible. Azazel is the reason 1 Enoch 10:8 states, and here the text will be cited directly, "To him ascribe all sin," not Samyaza, not Lucifer, not the prosecutorial Satan of the divine court, Azazel. By the end of this chapter, you will understand why that verdict was delivered, and why it changes how you read Leviticus entirely. This is the being I mentioned at the very start, the one the Torah sends a sacrifice to. We are here. Azazel is not Samyaza. This distinction is critical and is regularly collapsed in popular treatments of the Enochic tradition. Their crimes are different. Their punishments are different. Their theological weight is different. 1 Enoch 8:1-3 records Azazel's specific contribution. He taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He showed women the metals and the arts of beautification, bracelets, ornaments, the coloring of the eyes, gems, and adornment. He taught sorcery. He revealed the cutting of roots and acquaintance with plants. 1 Enoch 9:6 specifies that Azazel has taught all unrighteousness on earth and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven. His crime is epistemic, the transfer of knowledge that was not meant to cross the boundary between the divine and human realms. He did not desire human women. He did not seek embodied experience. He elevated humanity's technical and cosmetic and occult capacity in ways that the divine order considered a form of corruption. God's verdict, delivered in 1 Enoch 10:8, is unambiguous. The whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. All sin, not a portion of sin, not the sin of metalworking or vanity, all sin. The primary guilt for humanity's corruption is assigned here not to the progenitor of the Nephilim, but to the one who transferred forbidden knowledge. The reasoning is structural. Samyaza corrupted the bloodline. Azazel corrupted the mind. And in the Enochic framework, corrupting what humanity thinks and what it knows and what it reaches for is the deeper transgression, because it persists. The Nephilim died in the flood. The knowledge did not. Azazel's punishment, delivered through the archangel Raphael in 1 Enoch 10:4-6, is specific and brutal. Raphael is commanded to bind his hands and feet, to throw him into the darkness of the desert at Dudael, to cover him with pointed rocks and darkness, to cover his face so he cannot see the light, and to leave him there until the day of great judgment, when he will be cast into the fire. His name is in the Torah, Leviticus 16. Not as a villain to be defeated, as the recipient of a sacrifice. Leviticus 16 records the Day of Atonement ritual, Yom Kippur. 2 goats are brought before the high priest. One is sacrificed to God. The other is designated for Azazel. Aaron lays both hands on the head of the second goat, confesses the sins of the entire community over it, and it is sent into the wilderness. The Hebrew is La Azazel for Azazel. The grammatical structure is disputed. Some read it as a proper name, a recipient. Others argue it designates a place, a cliff, a ritual mechanism of removal. But the parallel structure of the ceremony presses hard against the place name reading. 1 goat for Y, HWH. 1 goat for Azazel. The grammar assigns each goat to a party. And the tradition that preserved Azazel's name in 1 Enoch as the primary corruptor of humanity is the same tradition that wrote this ritual into the legal code of the Torah, not symbolically representing a scapegoat destination, not referencing a geographical feature for Azazel. The being Enoch identifies as the primary recipient of all sin is receiving an annual sacrifice under the Mosaic law in the legal code of the same tradition, in a ceremony that remains central to Jewish worship to the present day. Later, rabbinic interpretation worked hard to neutralize this reading. Some rabbis argued that Azazel referred to a cliff, a sheer rock face from which the goat was pushed. Others treated it as a place name. The Mishnah in Tractate Yoma describes the goat being led to the cliff at Beth Hadudo and pushed backward. But these explanations sit uneasily against the parallel structure of the ritual. 1 goat for God, 1 goat for Azazel. The grammar does not describe a location. It describes a recipient. The Talmudic and later rabbinic tradition was, in the assessment of scholars including Judd Burton, clearly managing an archaic element in the text that had become theologically uncomfortable. A relic of a time when the being Enoch would later call the primary corruptor of humanity was still being propitiated in the official liturgical calendar. The Prometheus parallel is present and worth naming plainly. A divine being who transfers knowledge to humanity, metalworking, the arts, forbidden crafts, and is punished by the divine order with binding in rock and darkness, awaiting final judgment. The theological framing inverts between the Greek and Enochic traditions. In the Greek context, Prometheus is the tragic hero, punished unjustly for elevating humanity. In the Enochic context, Azazel is the corruptor, punished justly for infecting humanity with what it was not meant to have. The same archetype, the moral vector reversed. The name has not disappeared from the cultural imagination entirely. The grimoire tradition carries it forward. It surfaces briefly and without theological weight in the X-Men franchise. The resonance of the figure persists, even when the theology behind it is forgotten. What the scapegoat ritual represents at the level of the full narrative is this: the tradition that wrote the Torah had not forgotten what Azazel was. The ritual is a memory. a full episode on the Azazel scapegoat ritual, what it means, how it functioned within the annual atonement cycle, and what the tradition was actually doing when it sent sin into the desert, is forthcoming. For now, the point is sufficient. Azazel is in the Torah. He is not a footnote. He is the other half of the most sacred annual ritual in the Hebrew tradition. Azazel's crime was epistemic, the corruption of what humanity knows and how it uses that knowledge. His presence in Leviticus suggests the tradition that wrote the Torah had not yet forgotten what he was. But there is a being in the Enochic tradition whose crime is more intimate than Azazel's, more specific than Samyaza's, and whose identity, if the text is taken seriously, destroys one of the most foundational narratives in Western Christianity. Enoch names him. The church did not carry that name forward. The reason may be exactly what you would expect. 1 Enoch 69:6 names the being who led Eve astray. It is not the serpent. By the end of this chapter, you will understand what that claim does to the doctrine of original sin, and why a tradition that had preserved Azazel's name in its legal code chose not to preserve this one. Before delivering what the text says the comfortable version deserves its full statement, the obvious answer, the one most viewers carry and the one this video has been, in some sense, circling, is that the serpent in Genesis 3 is Satan in disguise. This is what most people assume. It is what centuries of Christian interpretation has taught. Origen built it into his theological system. Augustine made it the foundation of his doctrine of original sin. Milton crystallized it into the most powerful literary image the tradition produced. A brilliant, beautiful, subtle creature, Satan wearing the serpent as a costume, entering the garden to prosecute his war against God through the destruction of humanity. It would be a perfectly tidy conclusion. One adversary, one garden, one fall, one origin point for all human corruption. The prosecutorial Satan, the rebel Lucifer, and the Eden deceiver all folded into the same being, the same event, the same moment that explains everything that follows. Except the book of Enoch names the actual being. And it is neither the serpent nor Satan. Enoch names him. Chapter 69, verse 6. Not the serpent, not Satan, a watcher called Gadreel. The church built original sin on a foundation that a different text dismantles in one sentence. 1 Enoch 69, 6 states, in the Ethiopic manuscript tradition. And the third was named Gadreel. He it is who showed the children of men all the blows of death, and he led astray Eve, and showed the weapons of death to the sons of men. He led astray Eve. Not the serpent as a vehicle, not Satan working through the serpent. A watcher, a specific named watcher, performing the deception directly. Gadreel additionally teaches weapons: the shield, the coat of mail, the sword, the killing tools. There is an overlap with Azazel's domain here. Both are identified with the transfer of weapons knowledge, but the Eden connection is Gadreel's alone. The text is specific and it is not hedged. The implications for the doctrine of original sin, as Augustine formulated it, are considerable. Augustine's framework does not stand or fall on the personal identity of the Eden agent alone. Human disobedience, inherited corruption, and the need for redemption survive whatever name you assign to the deceiver. But the later Christian identification of that agent as Satan the supreme cosmic adversary, the being whose rebellion against God precedes and frames all subsequent human corruption, depends entirely on the Eden deceiver and the cosmic rebel being the same figure. That identification is what 1 Enoch 69:6 destabilizes. If the agent in Eden is Gadreel, a watcher with a specific crime and no cosmic biography, then the architecture connecting the garden to the cosmic war, the fall to the supreme adversary, requires a foundation that the Enochic tradition does not supply. It is worth being precise about what this means textually. The Jewish tradition, as scholar Annette Yoshiko-Reed has documented, never made the identification of the Genesis serpent with Satan that Christianity did. In the Jewish interpretive tradition, the serpent in Genesis 3 is a serpent, cunning, but not a vehicle for satanic agency. The identification of the serpent with Satan is a specifically Christian interpretive move, enabled in part by Wisdom of Solomon 2:24. Through the devil's envy, death entered the world, which is itself a Second Temple Jewish text, but one that does not appear in the Hebrew canon. The Enochic tradition's answer to the question, what being was responsible for the corruption of humanity in the garden, is simply different from the Christian answer. Not better, not worse, different. The Enochic tradition has a name for the Eden deceiver. The Christian tradition chose a different name for reasons that are institutional and theological rather than textual. Gadreel's name means God is my helper. Gad meaning fortune or a helper. El meaning God. The etymology encodes the betrayal with a precision that feels almost literary. The being whose name declares divine assistance is the one the text identifies as the deceiver of the first woman. Whether the naming is ironic or whether it reflects something about how the tradition understood the self-deception of transgression, the watcher who believed himself to be operating within divine sanction, is a question the text leaves open. The question this chapter leaves open is this: two traditions, two answers to the same question. What was the agent of deception in Eden? One tradition says Satan, working through the serpent. The other says Gadreel, acting directly. They are not in communication with each other. They are different communities answering the same theological problem in different ways. A full episode on Gadreel, the angel the Bible replaced with a serpent, is forthcoming. The textual and theological territory there is extensive enough to warrant it. Gadreel's presence in 1 Enoch 69 answers a question the Genesis text leaves open, but the answer creates a larger problem. If the being in Eden is a watcher with a name, and the prosecutorial Satan of Job is a divine court official with a function, then where exactly does Lucifer fit? The most famous figure in the entire tradition turns out to have the thinnest textual foundation of all five. The name Lucifer does not appear as a cosmic rebel in any pre-Christian Hebrew text. By the end of this chapter, you will understand how a Latin translation choice became a proper name became a fallen angel, and a fallen angel became the primary figure of Western evil, and why early Christianity used this same name as a positive title for Christ. Isaiah 14:12 is the verse from which everything proceeds. The Hebrew reads, Helel ben Shachar, shining one, son of the dawn. Helel is related to the root halal, meaning to shine or to boast. Ben Shachar is son of the dawn, a poetic designation for the morning star. Venus appearing at the horizon before sunrise. The verse appears in the middle of a taunting poem. Isaiah 14:4 introduces it explicitly. You will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. What follows is political satire, the kind of elevated mockery that uses cosmic imagery to puncture the pretensions of an earthly ruler. The king of Babylon, who considers himself the greatest light in the sky, will fall. The boasting star that tried to ascend above the clouds and set its throne above God's mountain will be brought down to the pit. The target is Babylon. The imagery is cosmic, but the subject is a human king whose empire fell. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, renders Hallel as Heosphoros, the morning star, the dawn bringer, a Greek noun, not a name. When Jerome translates the Hebrew into Latin in the Vulgate at the end of the 4th century, he chooses Lucifer, the Latin noun meaning light-bearer. Again, a common noun, not a name. Lucifer in classical Latin was a perfectly ordinary word for the morning star, used by Cicero, by Pliny, by Virgil. It carried no demonic freight. It was an astronomical term. The biographical construction of Lucifer as a cosmic rebel required a series of interpretive decisions made across several centuries. Origen, writing in the early 3rd century, applies Isaiah 14 to a cosmic fall of Satan, treating the taunt against Babylon as a description of a spiritual reality that the political event was merely reflecting. Tertullian makes similar moves. By the time these interpretations have circulated, the capitalized proper name Lucifer, derived from Jerome's translation choice, has attached itself to a cosmic biography that the text of Isaiah 14 was never written to supply. Augustine's systematization of original sin in the 4th and 5th centuries requires a supreme adversary, a singular evil intelligence whose rebellion against God precedes and enables the corruption of human nature in Eden. The emerging theology needed a name for this figure. Lucifer, by this point a capitalized proper name with an established cosmic biography, was available. The synthesis was made. The taunt against Babylon became the backstory of the devil. Luke 10:18 is regularly recruited to this narrative. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. The context matters and is rarely examined. Jesus has just received a report from 72 disciples who returned saying that even demons submit to them in his name. His response, I saw Satan fall like lightning, is almost certainly a response to that report. Their authority over demons is evidence of Satan's defeat or diminishment, described in the visionary language typical of apocalyptic speech. It is not a report of a historical event that Jesus witnessed in primordial time. The verse has been read as such by later interpreters, but the contextual reading does not support it. Revelation 12's dragon, the great red dragon that sweeps a third of the stars from heaven, identified as that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, is apocalyptic code operating in a tradition where images are dense, layered, and multiply referential. Scholars continue to debate the primary referent, Rome, Herod, a cosmic power, the persecuting empire. The text is not and was not written as a historical account of a primordial cosmic event. The detail that received its own full episode, and that this chapter can reference briefly as confirmed ground. The name Lucifer was used as a positive title for Jesus in early Christianity. 2 Peter 1:19 calls Christ the Phosphoros, the morning star, in the Greek. The Latin translation renders this Lucifer. Some early church fathers, including Tertullian in certain passages, applied the morning star imagery to Christ in a directly positive register. The same name, the same astronomical figure, applied both to the fallen being of Isaiah 14 and to Christ as the light who rises. As covered in the Lucifer episode, once the name was exclusively reserved for the devil, a process that took centuries. The positive Lucifer tradition became an inconvenience that was quietly set aside. The 5-century arc of Lucifer's construction is in this sense the most revealing of the 5 figures. Samyaza is in the text with a name, a crime, and a punishment, clearly and early. Azazel is in both the text and the Torah, with a legal ritual that preserves his name for 3,000 years. Gadreel is in the text with a specific act attributed directly to him. The prosecutorial Satan is a documented institutional role in the divine court. Lucifer is, primarily, a reading. Later, theology applied backward to earlier texts that were not written with him in mind. The most famous figure in the tradition has the least textual support as a distinct cosmic rebel in the source material. Lucifer is the most famous of the 5 and the one with the least textual support as a distinct cosmic rebel in the source material. He is largely a reading backward, later theology applied to earlier texts that were never written with him in mind. Which raises the question that the entire video has been building toward: how did 5 separate beings, 5 separate theological traditions, 5 separate communities, and their distinct understanding of evil get compressed into one? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is a theology. And it required each of these traditions to mean something it was never built to mean. The Western devil is not a discovery. It is a construction. By the end of this chapter, you will understand the 5 specific historical stages through which 5 independent traditions were compressed into one figure, and what each stage cost the tradition it consumed. Consider the problem facing later Christianity as it inherited this material. Too many villains, too many crimes, too many origin stories from too many communities with too many incompatible details. The tradition needed one enemy, one fall, one name, a theology that could be preached, defended, and handed down without requiring its recipients to hold 5 separate figures and 5 separate timelines in tension simultaneously. The merger that followed was not cynicism. It was the institutional logic of a tradition trying to survive. The first stage belongs to the 2nd and 1st centuries before the Common Era, and it is primarily Enochic. The tradition developing around the figure of Enoch in 1st Enoch, in the fragments discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Book of Jubilees, had assembled a rich and varied theology of evil. The Watchers and Azazel were its primary figures, embodied transgression, specific crimes, named punishment. The Satan of the divine court existed in parallel, but was not connected to the Watchers. Evil in this framework was plural and specific. It had multiple sources, multiple natures, multiple histories. The second stage is early Christianity, 1st century of the Common Era, Wisdom of Solomon 2:24 provides the hinge. Through the devil's envy, death entered the world. This is the first major textual move that connects the Eden narrative to an adversarial, supernatural agent. The identification is not explicit. The text does not name the serpent as Satan, but the direction of travel is established. As Christianity develops its theology and grapples with the relationship between the Hebrew inheritance and the New Covenant framework, the identification becomes increasingly explicit. The Eden serpent becomes Satan. The prosecutorial adversary becomes the cosmic enemy. The merger has begun. The third stage is the patristic period, 2nd through 3rd centuries. Origen and Tertullian are the architects of the cosmic fall narrative. Both apply Isaiah 14 to a primordial rebellion of Satan against God. Both are drawing on traditions, Jewish, Platonic, Zoroastrian, that are external to the original Hebrew texts. The taunt against Babylon becomes a window into a cosmic backstory. Lucifer, the Latin noun, becomes Lucifer, the cosmic biography. The 5 figures are not yet one, but the literary and theological material for the synthesis is being assembled. The book of Enoch is circulating. It is being read. It is being incorporated selectively. The 4th stage is decisive. Augustine, writing in the 4th and 5th centuries, systematizes the doctrine of original sin with a precision and authority that will define Western Christianity's understanding of evil for the next millennium. Augustine needs a single supreme adversary whose rebellion precedes and explains the corruption of human nature. The prosecutorial Satan, the cosmic Lucifer, the Eden deceiver, and the Enochic tradition all contribute material to this figure, but they are synthesized into one. The Enochic complexity is no longer a resource for thinking about the diversity of evil. It is a complication. The Book of Enoch, circulating with its named watchers and its distinct traditions and its Azazel scapegoat problem, was declared non-canonical, not in a single decision, but through a gradual marginalization that was completed by the time the Western canon was effectively settled. The reason is evident. A text that names 5 separate beings with 5 separate stories and 5 separate fates makes it very difficult to maintain the unified adversary that Augustine's theology required. The 5th stage is cultural crystallization. Dante places Satan at the center of the earth, massive, 3-faced, frozen in the ice of his own cold rebellion, the supreme evil intelligence trapped at the nadir of creation. Milton makes him the most compelling figure in the English literary tradition. Beautiful, articulate, tragic, the rebel who preferred to reign in hell rather than serve in heaven. Popular iconography produces the horned figure, the red-skinned tempter, the adversary waiting behind every human weakness. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the Western devil is not a theological proposition. He is a cultural fact. Every schoolchild knows his story. Every sermon has a central antagonist. Every framework of sin and redemption has a source and an adversary. The point that must be stated plainly: the church did not conspire to deceive. The people who performed this synthesis were not cynics. They were theologians, working under genuine institutional pressure to produce a coherent, teachable, defensible account of evil that could organize pastoral care, moral instruction, and liturgical practice across an enormous and diverse community. The synthesis solved real problems. A single adversary with a single biography is easier to preach than 5 distinct figures with 5 distinct crimes and 5 distinct fates. The simplification was institutional logic, not malice. But the simplification required setting aside the diversity of the source material, not through a single decision, not at a council vote, but through an accumulation of interpretive priorities in which texts that complicated the unified picture gradually became less useful than texts that supported it. It required the prosecutorial Satan to become the cosmic rebel. It required the Eden deceiver to stop being Gadreel and become Satan. It required Azazel's presence in the Torah's most sacred ritual to be explained away as a cliff. It required Lucifer, the Latin noun, to carry the weight of a cosmic biography the Hebrew text of Isaiah 14 was never written to supply. The cost of the simplification was the theological resources to think about evil as anything other than a single source with a single defeat condition. Samyaza, a mutineer who wanted a body. Azazel, a corruptor who bore the weight of all sin. The prosecutorial Satan, a job title, not a name. Gadreel, the being Enoch names as Eve's deceiver. Lucifer, a Latin translation choice that became a cosmic mythology. 5 separate stories, 5 separate crimes, 5 separate fates, one figure in the medieval imagination. What the entire arc of this tradition raises, and does not answer, is a question about the nature of evil itself. If these 5 figures are genuinely distinct, if evil entered the world through 5 separate events, perpetrated by 5 separate beings, recorded by 5 separate communities who were not in theological communication with each other, then what follows? One answer is that evil is unified, that behind the 5 figures there is a single intelligence, a single will, a single architect of human corruption that the various traditions were perceiving from different angles. That the synthesis is not a distortion, but a recognition. The church saw what the traditions were circling and gave it a name. In this reading, the devil is real, singular, and purposeful. He has a plan. He can be opposed, identified, resisted, ultimately defeated. The Enochic answer is different. It does not offer a unified adversary. It offers 5 specific failures, 5 distinct moments of transgression, 5 separate consequences that entered the world through different doors and have never been centrally coordinated. There is no one to defeat. There is no command structure to dismantle. There is no single source from which all corruption flows and to which the eradication of evil can be addressed. The Enochic answer is darker, because it means that the problem of evil is not a war with a defined enemy and a possible conclusion. It is the accumulated residue of 5 separate rebellions, none of them in communication with the others, all of them still propagating their distinct consequences through a world that has largely forgotten their names. The tradition suppressed that answer. There were good institutional reasons to do so. Whether the suppression served the tradition or cost it something it has not yet found a way to recover is a question that 5 separate texts, in 5 separate voices from 5 separate centuries, have been waiting a long time for someone to ask.